Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Westendorf, and welcome to Great Questions, Great Conversations, a podcast of St. Paul's in Muskego and the Bridge in Muskego, where we talk about topics, questions that have come from viewers, listeners over the last couple of years. We have a really good conversation, and we typically ask a whole lot more questions. And today, my guest is Professor Don Kudek, who is a professor at Wisconsin Lutheran College. And I'm excited to talk about a topic that doesn't get much press. We hear a lot about leadership, leader, lead this, lead that. Everybody needs to be a leader. You don't actually hear much about follower or followership. And that is going to be our topic here today. And so we want to say welcome to you, Don. It is great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of your program.
Yeah, it's we've talked a little bit about this off and on. You actually were on with an Awaken Alive group where we had you come in and talk a little bit about this to some of our young adults, and have kind of been keeping that in the back of our mind. And for us, we're kind of jumping into a sermon series that's going to touch on some of the themes of this idea of followership, although the way that it was described in the space where we began our sermon series is not what you study. So it's a little different use of the word. And so what we want to really do is dial in on what followership is in the world of business and philosophy, because this is a very real thing. And so, Don, maybe give us a high level 30,000 foot view of followership, what it is. And then I'm also going to ask that question, kind of think in the back of your mind, just why should people keep listening? What is it that we want them to take away from this? How is this going to be encouraging? So followership, and then why is this an encouraging topic?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think followership has become more and more intriguing to people as the world has changed. If you go back 30, 40, 50 years, and I'm talking from a business perspective now, the leader dictated orders and the people followed them and did what they were told, and they really didn't ask a lot of questions. And today, with technology and advanced degrees and so on, a good leader is a good leader in part because they are willing to listen to other thoughts, other ideas, other perspectives. And so people started to think about how do we incorporate followers into the space of business and society as a whole. And so we started to look at what are the benefits of followership and what is a definition of followership and how do we train people to be followers. And so I think the big reason that this has become popular is if you think about it, we, no matter what our role is, at times we are leaders and at times we are followers. So from the lowest person on the totem pole to the highest person on the totem pole, we play leaders and followers all day long. And so understanding or having a better understanding of what followership is and how to become a better follower is what this study and the research that we're all doing is all about.
What, this, see if I can phrase this right. Leaders get all of the headlines. All of us want to be a rock star. All of us, secretly deep down, some of us are born that we don't want to have the spotlight on us. I get that. But for a lot of people, especially in our social media driven day to day, I want to be the guy or the gal. And so leaders tend to get the ones who have stuff on the wall and pictures and name and print. And so there seems to be a lot of benefit to be the leader. But in the idea of follower, what is the win for us to why is being a better follower a win for me as a person?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you have probably two types of people that fall into categories that we can address that. The first would be the people that aspire to be that leader and want to have the corner office and want to move up the corporate ladder. And they need to appreciate the true value of having good followers. Now, we can talk and say, oh, we welcome people's thoughts and we want people to share their thoughts and ideas, but some don't. Some really just want to my way or the highway. So from a person that aspires to be a leader, understanding how valuable your followers are. Some statistics will show that as much as 80% success of a company can be attributed to the followers.
Amen.
And so understanding their value and then understanding how you can be a better follower, which when you get to the leadership position, now you're a better leader because you understand the importance and the steps it takes to be a good follower. On the other side of the coin, you have the people that don't necessarily want to be a leader, yet they want to find fulfillment. They want to find joy in their vocation, in their job. And so when people look down on followers, and I'm a follower in my task or in my society or even in my church, I tend to potentially not have as much joy in those roles as I would if people truly appreciated what a follower does and can do. And so if I have no aspirations of being a leader, and that's not the gifts the good Lord has given me, then appreciating who I am and doing it the best I can is so critical for that piece of the population.
That is, that's a really good point that I write when I'm taking notes. So if I'm not looking at you, I'm enjoying something that you said. So I'm in the field of meteorology. That's where I grew up. I'm working in a church space right now, and there have always been those people who want to be on the stage or behind the scenes. Or in the world of meteorology, it was, well, even when I started, I didn't want to be on the camera. I had worked at a TV station, but I would always say, I don't really want to be the guy. I'm just happy to be behind the scenes. And certainly for a season, I really was that. Eventually, I got comfortable with being up front, and I was able to make that transition, a lot like what you're saying. But there's a lot of people that are still in that field. They come into the field of meteorology, and they just want to be behind the scenes, and many are content. Now, you said something that was interesting to me. The people who don't want to lead still want joy and purpose in their work. And there's about 5 or 6 different people who've just popped into my mind in saying that, yet that yes, they have never wanted to lead, but when they go to work, they're really craving that ability to experience joy and purpose. How much of that joy and purpose then comes from a leadership culture that values them? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it brings up a really key point through all the studies and the research and the writings and stuff that is done in this area. Without a leader that appreciates a follower or appreciates the different roles of followers or looks to their followers for being something more than just a widget they use or a resource they use up, you have to have that culture. So assuming that culture is there, the follower can thrive in an area where they're contributing and being part of the process. Ira Chaloff is one of the key people in this space, and he wrote the book, The Courageous Follower. And one of the ways he describes it is normally you have a hierarchy where the leader is on top and the followers are down below.
Right.
But he draws it as a symbol where the purpose is in the middle of the diagram. So you have your purpose in the middle, and then going around the outside is both the leaders and the followers. And so the follower is not working for the leader, they're working for the purpose. And so when your leader and follower are on the same page, then we're both working toward the same goal. I understand the leader has his or her responsibilities and duties and authorities, and they respect what I have. Just like leadership, there's dozens of or if not more definitions of what it is, and the one that I've begun to really hang on to and really like is it's the accepting the influence of others in order to accomplish a task. So if I have a boss that just, dictates me or doesn't appreciate me, you can argue whether that person's even a leader. Okay, and we can take that someday too. What is a good leader? But the point being is when we both work toward a purpose, and I accept the influence of that leader because he or she has experiences I don't, or knowledge that I don't, or skills that I don't. Now I can be a better follower, not because the org chart says so, but because I'm accepting their influence when it comes to doing what I need to do. And both of us are working toward a common purpose.
I like that idea and that reframing of the organization. Obviously I'm in ministry right now, but I wasn't always. And that when the follower and the leader are both there to work toward purpose rather than a follower working for their boss. When, you've looked at this historically, when did that hierarchy and that way of doing work change? You answer that question first, and I'll share a thought.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree you can argue it hasn't yet. There are individuals that treat things differently or look at things differently, but I think by and large the majority of mentality in this area is still, somebody's at the top and the people below them are working for them. As far as when followership started being a thing was in the 1980s when a gentleman by the name of Robert Kelly wrote a book called In Praise of Followers. And that's what really kicked off this thought of we need to pay more attention to followers and not as much attention, I don't want to say not as much attention to leaders, because leaders are critical. I am not here to say that leaders are not critical and important in any of that. It's just, I think that what I like to talk about is the fact that the followers don't get the level of importance that they probably deserve in many cases. And once we elevate that, we can really enhance our organizations, whether it be a ministry or a weather studio or a grocery store.
Yeah, I've been around folks who've made the comment that when you're living life, it's really hard for you to discern how culture is affecting you in the way that you think. Of course, I grew up in America. Capitalism is the thing, right? And like it's the best. There's no problems with it. And yet, as you were talking, part of me was thinking, how much of that mentality of not seeing your followers in that way comes from this kind of, is there a role that capitalism that plays, like the economy that we've grown up with, that's just been American kind of through and through, does that drive some of this reality in a subconscious way that we don't even really recognize it? Or has it just always been entrenched regardless of where in the world you might be?
Yeah, and there's no doubt that different parts of the world look at this differently, and it really comes down to a differentiation on what we call individualistic societies and collective societies. A gentleman by the name of Gerhardt, who worked for IBM and traveled all over the world, was instrumental in this kind of study. An individualist country like America, and America is the most individualistic country when you do the tests and you run the scores. The United States is the most individualistic country in the world, as opposed to an Asian country where multiple generations live together, teams work together. It's not, look what I did, it's look what we did. So the capitalist society has come somewhat out of this individualistic mentality, and therefore no doubt has influenced how we look at our different roles. We have this individualistic mentality that has created entrepreneurs and people to generate tremendous wealth, which then leads to more people wanting to do that. And those people tend to lead different things, not necessarily be the leader, but they're leading things. And that's where we aspire to. Dr. Barbara Kellerman says that approximately $60 billion is spent annually on training leaders. And when you think about that tremendous amount of money that's being spent on that, it's this obsession with be a leader, be a leader, be a leader that causes us to forget the importance of those that are not in a leadership position day in and day out.
This is interesting. There's a couple different ways I'm going to go. Some of you are waiting. When's he going to ask the Jesus questions? We'll get to that. I want to keep unpacking it. I think that for a lot of our listeners, thinking about it through our shared experience of working in the world, particularly within the business climate, can be helpful to get a starting point, because we will transition to talking about, well, what does this mean for the Christian? What does this mean for the church and other applications along those lines? I didn't listen to the link that you sent. I ran out of time to do it, but you had talked about a quote from Brene Brown, and that as being a really important piece. And I was wondering if we might be able to shimmy over to that.
Yeah. And I'm not going to have it perfectly stated, but
Sure.
Basically what she says, and Dr. Brene Brown has become a leading author in her area of research and discussion is in the area of shame.
Yeah.
And her quote is, shame is the disconnect when we don't feel connected or we have not accomplished something that we believe should be accomplished. And so my concern, where I draw those connections is that when we run around telling everybody to be a leader, and I have pictures I've taken in grocery stores of toddler T-shirts that said future leader, or when you get to school and it's follow the leader. And that's the highlight of the week, when you get to be the one picking the rules and those kind of things. When people don't experience that leadership, whether they don't want to or they don't have the gifts to, is when this disconnection comes in and shame comes about. And the more we talk about be a leader, be a leader, be a leader, and I'm not a leader, then that all of a sudden it feels like something's wrong and I'm disconnected.
As you're talking, I don't know if I framed this right, but it's almost like, and I appreciate going back to the individualistic society. And again, for all of us listening in, America, and I'm assuming that most people who are listening to this one are going to be from America, that again, it's hard to understand how being in this country has shaped us profoundly, unless you go to another country or unless you really study some of those others. And I've done minuscule studying, but I have had enough international friends to know that there is another world outside of this very heavy individualism that we experience here in America, which has, as you mentioned, some superpowers. So the entrepreneurial spirit, and there's a phrase that I love: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. It's an old African proverb, and I'll say that one more time: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It would seem, Don, as though then the idea of being the leader or getting that label or achieving that status would be the height of individualistic achievement. Would that be fair to say? Like that is kind of the why it works so well in America, a country filled with individualism, that leader is the height of that. And we will say that's what humanity, that's what we should be all aspiring to.
Yeah, I think no doubt. And I think it's both for really, really good leaders, and I'll come to that back in a second, or those that you would say are not so good. And when I'm using the term good, I'm using more effective. So if I'm an effective leader, and an effective leader is getting people to do what you want and accomplishing goals and some of those things, even if I'm not the nicest guy in the world and don't always go about things the best way, and it's all about what's in it for me, individualism leads that to the peak of the pinnacle. That's what I'm looking for, whether it be president of a Fortune 500 company or politics or the largest church in America, whatever it is. Those people tend to want that. On the other side, a leader that you would call a servant leader, somebody that really looks out for his or her own people, wants to get there because that's where they can make the biggest difference for their people that are on their team or in their circles. And so whether you're driven for yourself or you're driven for others, getting to that area where you can have the greatest influence is no doubt part of that individualistic society. And as you said, kind of the pinnacle of many, many, many people's aspirations.
Shift just a little bit. Let's move toward followers. You mentioned when we were off air that one of the challenges, $60 billion invested in helping people lead better. And no doubt we want better leaders. We're part of the Global Leadership Summit. I don't know if you were there this year, but they hosted it at WLC. I've grown a lot in my leadership from doing that, particularly because they take the bend, they're bent towards servant leader, really trying to say that you're an effective leader when the people underneath you are thriving. So how can we help our followers thrive? But you mentioned, though, that there's not much in the way of helping with followership. And you said that all of us, even if you're like, I'm the leader, I'm the CEO, garbage, half the time you're following. The moment you walk out of your ivory tower and you're driving down the road at 15 miles over the speed limit and the police drive pulls you over, you better be following, you know?
Yeah.
So, and that happens for all of us. So what does it look like to train people to be better followers? What exists and what are you envisioning might happen in that area of trying to help people in the part of their life that they're following be a better follower?
Yeah. I think, there's many different avenues and the first 20 years, 25 years of this idea of learning and highlighting followership was all about just trying to figure out what it was and why it should be more and so on and so forth. And I think the last 20 years or so on is now how we can take that and apply it in people's lives. So as I mentioned, Ira Chaliff, he has used a 2x2 scale where he's talking about loyalty to your leader, as well as your willingness to challenge your leader. And so if you think of a 2x2 matrix, loyalty being on the vertical axis and loyalty being on the horizontal axis, when you get to this high both, what you really truly are is a partner in an organization. But you can't do that unless you are willing to learn how to better challenge your boss. Excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, I'm just concerned we're not going in the right direction, or I think we're cutting too many corners that may enhance the possibility of safety issues down the road. And so, again, his is loyalty and the ability to be courageous and stand up. So learning those four different quadrants and where you tend to fall, and then trying to create a way to be a better effective partner in the business is critical. So there's a training aspect. A gentleman that I mentioned earlier, Robert Kelly, who really kicked all of this off, he built his model on critical thinking and being active or passive. And so if I'm not much of a critical thinker, meaning I let somebody else do my thinking for me, and I'm real passive, then I get this sense that I'm just a follower. That's the sheep in the corner doing whatever I'm told to do. And when somebody tells me to do something, I do it because the leader told me. And then when it was all wrong, then, well, that's what I was told to do.
Mm.
And so in his world, what we want to get is people to think more critically. We want people to be more active rather than passive. Again, standing up when they see something, or taking a position to do more, if you will. Those things can make a follower, a better follower by, first of all, realizing there are different categories. And then secondly, what are the characteristics to make a better follower? A study that was done 15, 18, 20 years ago determined that of the top 10 characteristics of leaders, about 7 or 8 of them are the same characteristics we want in followers: honesty, integrity, open communication. That's what we want from our leaders. But think about it, we want that from our followers as well. One of the things I've been working on is what I'm calling the humble follower, which is an acronym for honest, unwavering, mission-minded, bold, and emotionally intelligent. So if you think of those 5 characteristics of somebody that is a true follower, and again, I'm going to say it like you mentioned a minute ago, we follow just as much in all of our roles as we do lead, regardless of our position. If we're that humble, unwavering, bold, mission-minded, learned, emotionally intelligent person, we can be a better follower and a better person for our organizations, regardless of what the organization is.
You said something that was interesting. I just want to help people, especially if you're listening and you can't visualize it, but that challenge in loyalty, that combo. It's a 2x2, box with 4 squares in it. And in the corner of the most effective follower is the follower who is willing to challenge, but is also loyal. And if you had challenge and unloyal, that would be a dangerous follower, because it would be always antagonistic and very frustrating. And then you gave the example of if you were also you weren't willing to challenge and you weren't loyal, you're just a punch the clock, do what I'm told, and then leave without much thought of making anything any better. And one of the things that's critical is that idea of if I'm leading, what's the Bible say? Wounds from a brother can be trusted. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. If my follower comes to me with a critical conversation for me, seeing something in me that is a problem or an idea that I have that is not working particularly well, it may sting a little bit in the moment, but I'm far better served because A, he was willing to come in and say something, but then B, was willing to stick it out and help me through it, continue the conversation.
Yep.
I heard you say challenging a leader, or if you are a leader, having a follower challenge you well is a good thing. What's been your experience with people with that?
Well, as I mentioned,
how well do we do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I teach the business ethics class here on campus, and after the semester, we have various exercises to try to figure out what the students' takeaway is. And many, many, many of the students say, I understand exactly what you're saying, that there's issues out there. We need to take a stand, all of that, but I don't know how to do it. And so one of the things I did a couple of years ago was add this book, The Courageous Follower, which helps people understand that there is a challenge to this, but how important it really is. If you go back, there's only one way to be able to challenge your leader, and that is to have a leader that you can trust and a leader that trusts you. So if that trust isn't there, if that relationship isn't there, and you walk in and say, I'm just not thinking we're doing the right thing here, that's going to go nowhere. And so this idea of followers or followership is just as important to leaders as it is to the followers. So if the leader has a greater appreciation for a follower and the follower comes in and says, excuse me, but I got some real concerns here. you're going to be more likely to be able to have that conversation than if there's not. I don't know what followers are. I don't care what followers are. Just be quiet and do your job. So that's critical.
I talk with a lot of young people. I know you work with young adults too, obviously being in the college. And that is one of the biggest challenges when you're a young adult in your 20s, kind of kicking off your career for the first time. You see things that you would like to do. Either you'd like to see them done differently because in your 2 years of experience have so much wisdom. But the other part of it is that you may see some real things, some missed opportunities because the people who are above us, my age, like, hey, you're missing something, but you haven't earned the credibility or the relational trust to have that kind of level of conversation. So, helping young people to be patient, to earn that credibility through a clear conscience. You don't want to go against your conscience. If a leader is asking you to do something that's sinful, then you can't do that. But that if it's not going against your conscience, that you be patient. But earning that gives you the ability. And then for us as leaders, this is probably one of my biggest challenges for all of us who are older, is if you'll just ask the question of a young person, extending them, it's almost like giving them a credit card of trust and saying, I'm going to put trust into our relationship by asking you your opinion. Because then I don't have to be defensive. If you come to me, like if you're the one coming to me, Don, and you're like, hey, I got a bone to pick with you. All right. My defenses are up. But if I ask you the question and say, hey, what are you seeing in this particular circumstance to help me understand your perspective? Boom, that's infusing that relationship and empowering the follower to be courageous and loyal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, they're opening the door. Again, Ira Chaliff, in the beginning of his book, talks about the reason we tend not to challenge is that those of us that are far away from the issue, okay, we see something up there, but we're far enough away from it. Why would I raise my voice or my hand because it doesn't impact me? And the people that are closest to the situation have the greatest to lose. And therefore, they tend not to challenge a situation because if the leader reacts in the wrong way, now all of a sudden I'm in the unemployment line. Or if what I'm saying causes a big problem at our company and all of a sudden the company goes into a financial crisis, I tend to lose a lot. So the further away we are, the less likely we're to say something because, what does it impact me, at the end of the day? And if we're too close or if we're closer to the situation, then we're at the risk of losing a whole lot more. And so as a result, we don't say anything in that scenario. And so it takes a lot of courage to raise your hand and say, yeah, but, and again, if the leader opens that opportunity, it's really fun to sit down with students that had their first little internship and the CEO or CFO of a company sits down with them over lunch and says, tell me what you're seeing here. And the students think that's like the greatest thing since sliced bread, that somebody on, the ivory tower would have lunch with them and talk to them. And when they see that kind of excitement in that respect, they may not take any of the students' ideas into consideration, or at least implementation probably, but the students feel so much better about what they're doing because somebody asked the question, to your point. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then that joy and that purpose, you become more aligned on that joy and purpose. So that's awesome. We're gonna pause here because we want to get into a more direct applied and specifically look at it from a Christian lens. But we're I think at about the half-hour mark, and so this is a good time to take a pause. Give us, Don, a real quick summary again on the idea of followership and why it's important, just as we close off this first half of the conversation.
Yeah, I think, again, the importance is there because the success of organizations relies on followers. Not everybody can or wants to be a leader. And if we can raise the awareness in three areas. First of all, just raise the awareness of importance of followers. If we can raise the fact that followers can be trained just like leaders can, and the fact that everybody that is even in a leadership situation or position is a follower as almost as much, if not more, than they are a leader, those ideas that can help that person, and then as a result, help the organization as a whole. And that's where this idea of followership is really starting to get legs.
Okay. So that's where we've been able to talk about the philosophical, the real world value of followership. That's what we've been talking about here today. Our next podcast next week, we will talk about some of the applications specifically to the Christian life and what that looks like, and quite frankly, some of the challenges that we might have in the church to understand what followership actually is and looks like. So with that, Don, I'm going to say thank you very much for being with us today. And I'm Mike Westendorf. You're listening to Great Questions, Great Conversations, a podcast to St. Paul's Muskego and the Bridge in Muskego, Wisconsin. And we will have more coming up next week.